The power grid fails. Banks close their doors. Store shelves empty in hours. If you're older, you're thinking, I'm too old for this. Your kids might be thinking the same thing, but seniors are actually the most prepared generation alive for a disastrous event right now. From surviving the Cold War, gas shortages, to multiple economic crashes without smartphones or Google, the skills forged in these trials. When the dust settles, they'll be the true gold. I'm going to show you precisely why your age experience can be your biggest advantage in an end-of-the-world crisis, and the 3 things you need to do this week that could save your life. Right now, the world seems fragile. We see it every day in the headlines, from extreme weather to economic instability and political division. When we imagine a large-scale crisis, a societal collapse, who do we picture as the most vulnerable? The answer, almost universally, is the elderly. But this is only half the story. What if the very things that define an older generation, their lived history, their analog skills, their deep-rooted community ties, are not relics of a bygone era, but critical assets for a future one? Who truly benefits when the systems we rely on falter, and who is most at risk? Our modern lives are built on a complex and delicate infrastructure. We depend on just-in-time supply chains for our food, digital networks for our money, and a constant flow of electricity for nearly everything else. This system is efficient, but it's also brittle. A single point of failure can trigger a cascade of disruptions. Imagine an isolated town where the electricity goes out, and they don't come back on for a long time. The first few days are filled with confusion, then fear. The roads are empty except for the desperate. The air smells of wood smoke as people try to stay warm. Who walks through these streets with a steady gait, checking on neighbors and offering a quiet word of advice? In many of our foundational stories, the answer is the elders. They remember how to grow food in a backyard plot. They know how to fix a leaking pipe with simple tools. They are the keepers of the physical maps and the handwritten phone lists. They have seen fear before, and their calm is not an act, it is earned. This scenario is a reflection of a psychological reality. Experience with past crises, even smaller ones, can inoculate a person against panic. A senior who lived through the oil crisis of the 1970s remembers waiting in long lines for gasoline, and learning to conserve every drop. Someone who grew up during the Cold War remembers the drills, the public service announcements, and the low-level hum of existential anxiety that became a part of daily life. They learned to live with uncertainty, a skill that is now in desperately short supply. When chaos erupts, the person who doesn't panic is the person who can think clearly. That calm becomes a form of power when all else is shaking. Think about the practical skills that were commonplace just 1 or 2 generations ago. Mending clothes, preserving food through canning or pickling, navigation without GPS, making minor home repairs, knowing how to properly sharpen a knife. These were not simply hobbies, they were necessary life skills. In a world stripped of its digital conveniences, the person who can make something or fix something becomes an invaluable resource for their community. Let's look back further into history to one of the most studied societal collapses of all time. When the Western Roman Empire fell, the change was not instantaneous, but it was profound. The great aqueducts that fed the cities crumbled. The vast road networks fell into disrepair. Centralized authority vanished, and with it the systems that guaranteed grain shipments and maintained order. Life in Rome, once the center of power and culture, became precarious. But not everyone lost everything. The collapse didn't reset society to zero, it redistributed power and influence in surprising ways. Who held on? In many cases, it was the established local elites who were older individuals, senators with provincial landholdings and wealthy merchants with deep roots in their towns, religious leaders who commanded respect and authority. When the imperial structures dissolved, power didn't simply evaporate, it flowed downward and outward, coalescing around existing nodes of local influence. The person who owned the land, controlled the local mill, presided over the church, became the new de facto leader. Now, we have to look at the other side of this coin, and the facts are stark and sobering. For all the potential advantages of experience and wisdom, the data from modern disasters tells a clear and painful story that older adults are extremely vulnerable. We cannot and should not ignore this reality. In 2005, when Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, approximately 70% of those who died were over the age of 60, even though they made up only about 15% of the city's population. This is not an isolated statistic, it's a pattern that repeats itself with terrifying regularity in crises around the world. The reasons for this heightened vulnerability are complex but clear. Many seniors live with one or more chronic health conditions such as diabetes and heart disease. These conditions often require a steady supply of prescription medications, medical equipment that relies on electricity, and regular appointments with healthcare providers. When a disaster strikes, supply chains or severed power grids go down and clinics close. For an older person dependent on an oxygen concentrator, daily insulin injections, a prolonged power outage is not an inconvenience. It is a life-threatening emergency. Their well-being is tied directly to the stability of the very systems that are most likely to fail. Furthermore, physical mobility can be a significant challenge. Evacuating from a disaster zone requires. There is another critical factor we must consider: money and assets. In the United States and many other developed nations, baby boomers and the silent generation hold a disproportionately large share of the nation's wealth. Decades of work, investment, rising property values, that has resulted in significant holdings of real estate stocks and savings. On the surface, this wealth seems like a powerful buffer against any crisis. If you have money, you can buy your way out of trouble. But in a true systemic collapse, the nature of that wealth matters immensely. The question is not just what you own, but what you can actually use. Let's consider paper wealth and tangible assets, money in a bank account, a stock portfolio, among other assets. All of these depend on functioning financial and digital networks. If the banks close, the ATMs are empty, and the internet is down, that wealth becomes inaccessible, and it is effectively worthless in the short term. You cannot eat your stock portfolio. Tangible assets are things you can physically touch. They retain intrinsic value. A paid-off house with a large yard, a piece of rural land with a well, a workshop full of tools, a pantry stocked with food. These assets become incredibly important when the conventional economy ceases to function. So, the paradox is that seniors are simultaneously highly vulnerable due to health and mobility issues, yet potentially advantaged by their experience and tangible assets. This contradiction is sharpened when we look closely at the double-edged sword of modern medical and technological dependence. The very advancements that have extended lifespans and improved quality of life for millions of older adults also create a critical point of failure in a disaster scenario. It is a trade-off that is rarely discussed but lies at the heart of their unique predicament in a crisis. Consider the vast array of medical devices that have become commonplace: pacemakers, insulin pumps, home dialysis machines, oxygen concentrators, and electric mobility scooters. These technologies are miracles of modern science. However, nearly all of them share a fatal flaw. They are utterly dependent on a reliable source of electricity. A power outage that lasts for a few hours is an inconvenience. An outage that lasts for days or weeks can become a death sentence for those who rely on these machines to live. This dependence creates a stark divide. An older person in good health, who is not reliant on such technology, may be able to leverage their analog skills to great effect, but their neighbor, who is of the same age but tethered to a machine, faces a completely different and far more dangerous reality. This is not a judgment on their lifestyle or choices. It is a simple, brutal equation of infrastructure dependency. Any honest assessment of survival must acknowledge that the benefits of modern medicine come with this hidden, high-stakes risk. The very thing that keeps someone alive in normal times becomes their greatest liability when those times end. There is a hard truth we must confront here. The very systems that have allowed more people to live into old age with chronic conditions have also made a segment of that population more fragile in the face of systemic shocks. A house without power or running water is a difficult place to live for anyone, but for an elderly person with compromised health, it can quickly become uninhabitable. This doesn't negate the potential strengths of the senior population as a whole, but it does mean we cannot paint them with a single broad brush. Let's move from the theoretical to the specific. Think of a real-world scenario in a quiet suburban town after a massive ice storm has knocked out power for what everyone assumes will be weeks. The temperature is dropping fast. In one house lives a young family, parents in their 30s, with 2 small children. They have smartphones with dying batteries, a pantry full of snacks that require a microwave, and a growing sense of panic. A few doors down lives a retired couple, both in their early 70s. Their names are Carol and David. They are not survivalists. They are just old enough to remember a different way of doing things. While the younger family is trying to figure out how to stay warm, David goes to the garage. He pulls the cover off an old wood-burning stove he inherited from his father, something he hasn't used in 20 years but never got around to discarding. He checks the stove and, using his memory of how his father did it, safely gets a fire going. Meanwhile, Carol goes to the basement. It's lined with shelves holding dozens of glass jars, tomatoes, green beans, peaches she canned at the end of the summer, a skill her mother taught her. It's a hobby she does mostly for nostalgia. Tonight, it's their lifeline. They can't carry heavy loads, but they have a system. David knows how to regulate the stove to conserve wood. Carol knows how to heat a jar of soup on top of it without it cracking. They also have a non-digital asset that's even more valuable, a handwritten address book. They do remarkably better than the couple down the street because of their prior knowledge and experience. So, what can seniors, or those who care for them, do right now? Not next month, not when a crisis is looming, but this week. The goal is not to become a hardened survivalist overnight, but to take small, manageable steps that dramatically increase your resilience. These actions are simple, low cost, and leverage the strengths we've been discussing: planning, community, and foresight. Here are 3 practical things every senior should do. First, secure a 90-day supply of all essential medications. This is the single most important step for anyone with a chronic health condition. Talk to your doctor and your pharmacy. Explain that you want to build a personal reserve for emergency preparedness. Many insurance plans will accommodate a 90-day mail-order supply. Once you have the medication, store it in a cool, dark, and dry place. Create a clear, written list of all your medications, dosages, and the conditions they treat. Make 2 copies, and put 1 on your refrigerator, and give the other to a trusted family member or neighbor. This simple action buys you a crucial 3-month window in any crisis. Second, create a simple, 1-page emergency plan and a go bag. This doesn't need to be complicated. On a single sheet of paper, write down the phone numbers of 3 key contacts: 1 family member who lives far away, your out-of-state contact, 1 friend or neighbor who lives nearby, and 1 local resource, like a house of worship or community center. Designate a nearby meeting place if you have to leave your home. Then, prepare a small, easy-to-carry bag, a bottle of water, a flashlight with extra batteries, a warm sweater or blanket, a first aid kit, copies of your ID and insurance cards. In the end, we are left with a complex and challenging picture. The idea that seniors might thrive in a collapse is not a guarantee. It is a possibility, conditional on preparation and community. The risks they face are real, immediate, and backed by tragic data from every recent disaster. Chronic illness, limited mobility, social isolation are powerful forces that can turn a crisis into a catastrophe for the elderly. We must never lose sight of this vulnerability, but at the same time, we cannot afford to ignore the unique and potent strengths that this generation holds. A lifetime of experience, invaluable practical skills, ownership of tangible, useful assets. This brings us to an unavoidable ethical question. If crises tend to favor those with wealth, what responsibilities do the advantaged bear toward those with less? The answer cannot be to simply hoard resources and protect one's own. That is a recipe for a brutal and fractured society. The true path to resilience lies in an intergenerational pact. It lies in older adults recognizing their potential as anchors of stability and actively sharing their wisdom, their tools, their resources. It lies in younger generations recognizing the value of this experience and offering their strength, their energy, and their technological savvy in return. Helping a neighbor is not just an act of charity, it is a strategic investment in collective survival. The future is uncertain, but our response doesn't have to be. We are not helpless. You are not alone. There are guides and resources available from organizations like FEMA and the Red Cross, often accessible through your local library or senior center. But preparation begins long before you read a pamphlet. It begins with a shift in mindset. It begins with asking a few simple questions tonight. Who will I call if the lights go out? Who can check on me? Who can I help? The act of asking is the first step toward building an answer. Here is your final, urgent call to act. If you are over 65, commit to those 3 simple steps this week. Secure your medicine. Write your 1-page plan. Call your neighbors. If you are the child, grandchild, or friend of an older person, help them do it. Don't wait for the storm to gather on the horizon. The work of building a resilient community begins now, in the quiet moments, with a simple conversation and a shared plan. When we plan together, we do more than just survive. We preserve the fabric of our families and our neighborhoods. We keep our stories, our skills. Subscribe to Young at Heart to explore surprising insights on how seniors can thrive, even when the world feels like it's ending.